Good evening. My name's Evan and welcome to Rockland Graves. 2022 has been a really solid year for horror movies. It's probably one of the best in a long time. In that sea of great original horror films we've gotten this year, Terrifier 2 might be the most impressive in terms of its reach. It's the follow-up to 2016's Terrifier, which became known for its extreme levels of violence and very memorable villain, Art the Clown, played by David Howard Thornton. Terrifier 2 has been talked about a lot recently because it's doing something pretty amazing. This movie had a budget of $250,000 thanks to a very successful Indiegogo campaign, and its original one-weekend theatrical run became an $8 million plus phenomenon. The movie's getting a lot of eyes because of reports that people are apparently passing out and throwing up in the theater, which is always great free marketing. This review will be completely spoiler-free, but at some point in the future I do want to do a spoiler-filled review so I can get into much more detail about why I think this movie is so special. The first Terrifier is a decent grindhouse slasher movie, but if it weren't for the incredible performance from David Howard Thornton as Art the Clown and the ridiculous makeup effects from writer-director Damien Leone, I think the movie probably would have been lost to time. Aside from those two elements, I gotta be honest and say that Terrifier is not a very good movie, but because those two things are handled so well, the movie stuck around. I fucking loved this movie, and I'm not even a die-hard fan of the first movie. I've seen both entries twice, and Terrifier 2 is an immense improvement over the first film in every conceivable way. The story and characters are where you'll find the most improvement, which is exactly what I was looking for, because in that right, the first film completely shit the bed. By improvements, what I mean is that Terrifier 2 actually has characters and a plotline. The original is essentially like an Art the Clown display piece, but this is a fucking movie. The characters are much more defined this time around, and they're complemented by some surprisingly good performances. Not all of the acting is like fantastic, and I don't think there's going to be any Oscar winners from this, but the characters who really needed good performances got them. It's not like the characters here are just acceptable either. I actually really enjoyed watching them, and it made me feel way more invested in this film than I was in the first one. Lauren Levera is fucking fantastic as Sienna, but unfortunately I can't really say anything else about that until I get into the spoiler video. Just know that she's really, really good. She's one of my favorite final girls in a very long time. The only performance I can talk about in detail in this review is David Howard Thornton as Art the Clown. Dude, he was already the best part of the original film by far, and this movie cranked up what he was given in the script to 11, and he killed it, and kept killing it, and oh my god, David, Jesus Christ, it's already dead, man! This movie's brutal as shit, you already know this, but it also deserves credit for how funny it is. There are moments in this movie where I just broke out laughing. Thornton's performance as this character is so good, and he doesn't have any lines. It's all in the physical performance, and he does it so well. Even when what's actually happening is absolutely horrendous by every metric, he'll make some face or do some little action that I just can't help but laugh at. But he can also become scary as shit in the blink of an eye. It's a fantastic mix. He's just so expressive, and this movie has made him one of my favorite horror antagonists in a long time. He's built up in such an evil, sadistic way that by the end of the movie, you just really want to see this guy get taken down. I found it to be a really effective and cathartic good versus evil climax. Art the Clown he's gonna stick around, and I can definitely see him becoming a modern slasher icon if things keep going the way they are. The narrative got a lot more attention here, and I found myself really enjoying following this story. It's not a, sing it from the rooftops incredible plot, but it's interesting enough that it kept me engaged throughout the entire runtime. There are a lot of questions that this movie raises about the characters and the lore and the world of this franchise that it doesn't really answer, but let's go back a few words to where I called this a franchise. There is going to be a Terrifier 3, and I wouldn't be surprised at all to see more films down the line. These questions didn't make me feel lost, but more so intrigued about what they meant, and it made me really excited for the next entry in this series. I will say that it would have been nice to have some of these things fleshed out, because again, there's a lot of questions raised, and instead of answering a couple and leaving some other answers for future entries, none of them really get answered. I'm sure you could piece some things together if you pay really close attention, but I was just so thoroughly entertained by this movie and the crazy turns that it takes, and that was enough to keep me satisfied, especially knowing that more is coming. I think there are elements of how far out into kind of like weird cerebral territory this movie gets that might bother some people, but I love when movies take crazy, weird twists. I love bizarre movies. I mean, come on, some of my favorite movies from 2021 were Malignant and Pig. I just can't help myself. There's actually some social commentary in the movie as well, which I wasn't really expecting to see, but it's a little muddy. There's some that worked, but overall I found most of it just didn't land. I couldn't quite tell what the point of it was. It's nothing that even remotely gets in the way of the film, though, and I actually did find some of it interesting. One comment in particular, which has become even more topical than it was when this movie was filmed. You might know what I mean when you watch it.
It involves people dressing up in a Halloween costume they probably or really fucking shouldn't because it's extremely disrespectful.
It's a long movie, too, clocking in at 2 hours and 18 minutes. Holy shit, that's gotta be the longest slasher movie I've ever seen. I've seen the movie twice now, and I gotta be honest, it flew by both times. I never found that it dragged, but on my second viewing, I definitely did notice that most shots in this movie seem to go on just a little bit longer than they need to, and there could have been some fluff trimmed off of most shots, and it probably would have improved the pacing, but pacing didn't bother me. I just had such a fun time watching it on both viewings. Alright, time to address the thing you probably clicked on this video to hear me talk about. This movie is transcending the horror community and making headlines on major news outlets for being extremely gory. People are passing out, throwing up, paramedics are being called to showings of the movie, warnings are being issued about it. It's fucking insane. Look, I've seen a lot of gory movies, but I think I can confidently say that Terrifier 2 is the goriest movie I've ever seen and probably has the most horrific death I've ever witnessed in a film. I'm really trying to think of a movie that tops it, but nothing comes to mind. I will say that I didn't have a reaction anywhere near to what I'm hearing about at the showings, but this movie's murders made me make faces, and if a movie's murders make me make faces, then maybe the murders in that movie are madly macabre. Damien Leone. This man has a mind for coming up with the most horrifically painful ways for people to die. Some of these scenes, they just start and they just keep fucking going. Good God, dude, stop it. They've had enough, man. As horror fans these days, when we hear this kind of headline, we usually go, oh yeah, whatever. You know, we hear things about like The Conjuring being the scariest movie of all time. It's like, come on. I'll say that the reports surrounding this movie, pretty spot on. This is an intensely violent, graphic, grotesque gore fest that I think could really fuck with someone who's not prepared. Art the Clown is an evil, sadistic villain who's just having the time of his life doing the absolute worst things. I'm a huge advocate for practical makeup effects, and Leone brought his A game and just went balls to the wall crazy with some of these scenes. This movie actually has been submitted to the Oscars solely for the meme of making the Academy sit down and watch this movie, which I think is fucking hilarious. And I know it'll never happen, but I would like to see Damien Leone get some sort of award for the makeup effects here, because they're some of the best I've seen in a long time. And one other thing I need to praise about this movie is the score. I was listening to it for weeks waiting for the movie to be available in my region, and it's insanely good. I really like the mix of synth and acoustic instruments, and the compositions themselves are really solid. It's a very evocative and atmospheric soundtrack that really elevates this movie, but it also works really well on its own. I've listened to Sienna, Art Party, and Terrified to Tears more times than I'd like to admit, and I was looking and actually did find the soundtrack is on vinyl, so if you're interested in picking it up, do that. They're signed by the composer, and I highly, highly recommend it. At the end of the day, I'm just really glad that this movie exists. It's a low-budget, uncut, extremely gory slasher that runs 138 minutes, and it's already made over $10 million. Yeah, I said $8 million earlier in this video, but I'm finishing the script a few days later, and this movie just keeps going. This is a really important moment in horror history that we all get to be a part of, and that's really exciting. This movie is solidified, and it feels like the start of something really fucking cool for horror movie fans and for the genre in general. It's not for everyone, not just because of the extreme levels of violence, but the movie actually veers into some really weird, like, fantasy territory that not everyone will enjoy. I fucking loved it. Some people might prefer the more gritty, dirty feel from the original movie, but for me, there's absolutely nothing in the first that I think was done better than the second. I like the second movie better in every single way. Again, I'll need to do a longer, more in-depth, spoiler-filled video to really get into detail about this movie, but for this video, I'll leave it at that. This is a really special film, and if you feel like you can handle the violence in this movie, I'd say it's an essential viewing for any horror movie fan. Bring on Terrifier 3. I love this movie. Thank you for stopping by Rockland Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.